got back home. I understand it's 9:35 now. And my first question concerns the High Commissioner report released on Wednesday. So yeah, could you please just take us through your take on it, your opinion, and the implications of it going ahead?
Well, I think firstly, the report in itself, without doubt, is not ideal in the sense that it's not exactly what we would have expected or what we would have liked. But given those expected shortcomings, I think the High Commissioner's report that has come out this year is the closest that we could say of the numerous reports that have come out over the years to what the Tamil people would have liked to expect. Firstly, I think the most important part of the report to me is the fact that for the first time, the report acknowledges that the armed struggle was a consequence of systematic discrimination and disempowerment. I think that's crucial because in the past, the general narrative has been to try and sort of take a snapshot of the conflict, time frame the conflict in a way where the armed struggle had just started. So it's just a question of two sides at each other and then taking things from there. But the fact that this report specifically states that the armed struggle was a result of systematic discrimination that had taken place against the minorities, particularly the Tamils. And for the first time, they actually mention the identity, I think is crucial because, there is a worry amongst the Tamils that the crime of genocide, for example, might not be investigated, or that it might not be, properly placed in the in the context of what has happened over the last 72 years. So for all of that, it just lays the groundwork for the question of a just war on the side of the Tamils, and I think that is crucial. I think that's the first time that's it's ever happened at that level. So that's the first point. The second one is, of course, the fact that there is a reference to the International Criminal Court. And I think that is crucial because in the UN structure, the only place, if you have a country that is not, that is not interested in accountability and is behaving the way that Sri Lanka has been behaving, the only way in which you can get a country to face accountability is through moving that country to the ICC. I mean, of course, that is within the UN structure. If you have states in itself, you have universal jurisdiction. You have the possibility of a country referring Sri Lanka to the International Court of Justice. All of that is there, but within this multilateral structure, the only avenue that you have is to the ICC, and that is since 2002. Of course, previously it would have been the establishment of an ad hoc International Criminal Tribunal. So the fact that the High Commissioner's report specifically says that Sri Lanka must be referred to the ICC and to contemplate actions, various other options that each state may have, I think is very, very important. It escalates the question of accountability to the point of the highest international court that you can possibly expect. So these are the two main points. Of course, there are shortcomings. I mean, the fact that Tamils are referred to as a minority, that nationhood is nowhere close to being recognized, that genocide has not been specifically mentioned. I mean, those are shortcomings that we can expect. But once again, I mean, the question of nationhood is a political identity. That is something that I think someone like the Human Rights High Commissioner would be reluctant to sort of identify with, at least till such time as the General Assembly passes a resolution or something to that effect. So to some extent, I can sort of forgive the fact that we have not been identified as a nation. For example, Myanmar is being investigated by the ICC, and Myanmar took up the opposition that the Rohingya people were specifically mentioned, and Myanmar doesn't recognize that nationality. They raised the objection, and the ICC gave the reply that for the purposes of only the investigation and not giving a political sort of recognition, that they refer to the Rohingya people. So, I mean, there are constraints, unfortunately, within this international structure where obviously subordinate arms of the UN, unless there is specific recognition of certain identities, that they will be quite reluctant to mention it themselves. So, giving the benefit of the doubt to the High Commissioner on that, and also considering the fact that she has made the boldest report that any High Commissioner has made so far, I think it's a good report to work with. I think it's a turning point. If we handle the actual states, the individual states properly, I think it's a foundation, or a possible foundation for a turning point. And we personally, as the TNPF, I think we, to a great extent, feel vindicated, because we've been calling for a referral to the ICC, and we've been doing that since 2002. Of course, when we've been consistent on that position, we've been ridiculed. We've been belittled. We've been called all sorts of names, and that the fact that you have the High Commissioner for UN Human Rights body stating it herself, I think just clearly shows that if at all, we've been honest with our people from the word go. So to a great extent, the TNPF stands vindicated. But apart from that, I think ultimately it's the Tamil people who stand to gain from this report, provided that the Tamil people handle it properly. And I think there are still severe, dangers that we can face, that we will face. I think there are concerted efforts to make sure that the Tamil people are distracted from what actually we should be concentrating on, and what our target ought to be. Those are things I'm sure we will discuss during this conversation. But once again, as I said, if we stay focused, I think this is a good report to have.
Yeah, you mentioned there that this report could be potentially a turning point, and it's the boldest report to have come from any UN High Commissioner. Are there any sort of particular geopolitical dynamics at play that you feel have contributed to this report and the boldness of it?
No, I think the High Commissioner's office, there might have been pressures on her, but I think to by and large, the High Commissioner's office tends to take a more sort of principled position. I think they've demonstrated that right through from 2012. Whenever we've had them come up with the High Commissioner's office has been asked to report. Of course, we've been disappointed earlier on, but then there is a learning curve. I mean, they also start from giving the government the benefit of the doubt, and then they gradually build up. So I think there has been a clear sort of curve, which is consistent with the way in which the Sri Lankan state has been behaving. Of course, I mean, from a Tamil perspective, the High Commissioner's reports in 2012 and around that time, I mean, we disagreed with quite strongly. But then from their point of view, once again, it's giving the government the benefit of the doubt, hoping that they will cooperate with the UN Human Rights Council structure, mechanism, and hoping that accountability will be delivered within the council itself. So when you have a situation when that is quite clearly not going to happen, then of course the High Commissioner is forced to take a principled stand. So I think that is what has happened here. Geopolitics will come in when the states, when the countries, sort of contemplate the report and then eventually decide on what sort of resolution should come about. So I think the geopolitics should be seen from what the member states actually do within the council, as opposed to the High Commissioner itself.
Right, okay. Moving on to something that's come out recently from the Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary, Jayendrakumar. He said that the core group at the UN Human Rights Council has indicated to us that they would like to have a consensual resolution that would give us another year to implement human rights commitments. And what's your reaction to this statement from the Foreign Secretary?
Yes, I mean, I think that is correct. I think my information also is that Britain in particular has approached the government where they've sort of sought a consensual resolution. The government seems to have suggested that if that is to be contemplated, then it has to be a resolution that is jointly drafted. So I don't know what's going to happen of that. But I mean, our position is that that is ridiculous. I mean, to expect this government after almost a decade to have any sort of faith in the Sri Lankan system, political system, to actually deliver on whatever pledges that have or that will be given in the instance of a consensual resolution, I think that is just ridiculous. So our position is that we will oppose it. We will campaign against it. And this particular government is not like any other government. This particular government is actually directly implicated. I mean, Gotabaya Rajapaksa is one of the main accused persons. Shavendra De Silva is an accused person. I mean, it's not just what we are saying, it's what these very same countries like the United Kingdom itself says. So when you have a situation such as that, to even think in terms of a consensual resolution, I think should be heavily opposed. We will certainly oppose it. I think the Tamil diaspora should oppose it. And we'll see. I mean, the odd thing is that even if the government, even if Britain or the core group wishes to have a consensual resolution, if the risk that they face is that if they actually do go into discussions with the Sri Lankan government, they will be expected to compromise to such an extent that their credibility will just go out of the window. So, I mean, it will only prove critics like myself, who have been saying that accountability has never been on the agenda of these countries, that it is only geopolitics. And here you have a strong report coming from the High Commissioner, which is going to be used as leverage in order to get concessions, is going to be proved. So I hope I'm proved wrong. But there is the very fact that Britain, even the core group, have in fact, have been contemplating a consensual resolution itself, in my view, shows that ultimately it's geopolitics that dictates decisions.
Yeah. I mean, that's the concern that I think a lot of us have. And does that kind of the fact that the core group have apparently indicated this, does it dampen the perhaps optimism that may have arisen from Michelle Bachelet's report?
Yeah, I mean, there is that possibility. Obviously, back in the homeland, I think the people still don't understand the distinction between the High Commissioner, and the High Commissioner's office, and the Council itself. And the fact that the High Commissioner's office is separate and the Council decisions are taken by member states, that distinction is generally not properly understood by by the general public, at least certainly in the homeland. But having said that, I think we've been careful. We take pains to explain that it's the High Commissioner's office that has issued the report. But this is still not anywhere close to having some concrete sort of decisions, because at the end of the day, it is going to be the countries that decide. So we go out of our way to try and explain that to the people. But I think at the end of the day, credibility also does, will play a huge part, because Britain and other core group members know fully well that the risks they take in going for a consensual resolution with the Sri Lankan state, given this present administration's mindset, I think are so great that they rather take a principled stand and get a resolution closer to what the victims would like than think in the short term and sort of compromise. Because I think the consequences of credibility of those core group members being lost, where you have significant Tamil diaspora presence, I think will be in the coming years. I think will be crucial. So I think they'll be fully aware of it, and I'm just hoping that common sense will prevail, and even their own geopolitical interests, things will make a little bit more sense if they sort of focus on what the Sri Lankan state and this particular incumbent government is all about.
Right, okay. Just moving on now to the joint letter that was addressed to the member states of the UN Human Rights Council, which you were partly involved in, as well as your party. It was the TNA and the TMTK and other civil society organizations. Just wanted to get your take on it in terms of, are you satisfied with the contents of the letter, and also to what extent did you have to compromise with the other parties and organizations involved?
Well, I mean, for starters, we are satisfied. There was compromise in the sense that the TNPF has been sort of insisting that, given the sort of geopolitical interests of the players, particularly those who are moving for a resolution, our party has always stated that as victims, we must take a principled stand on what we want, and we must not compromise on it. So, for example, if we are sure that an internal inquiry is not going to produce any results, then we must insist that it has to be an international criminal accountability mechanism. And we must not compromise on it. So if something else is being offered, as victims, we must be prepared to resist. We must be prepared to stand and say that, look, this is not going to serve us. Even as victims, we don't want this. So that has been our position since 2012. We've been critical of all the resolutions that have been passed in the Council, because none of them actually spoke in terms of what actually ought to happen, which is a referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC, or a setting up of an ad hoc tribunal, or taking Sri Lanka to the ICJ, or universal jurisdiction, etc., etc. It has to be an international accountability process. Now, the danger when you ask, so in principle today, the fact that Sri Lanka has to be referred to the ICC is an absolute must. I mean, I don't think any Tamil political actor can have any credibility in not asking for a referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC or to any other international criminal accountability mechanism, right? So when you ask for that, you must make sure that these other geopolitical actors don't get a chance to deviate from that position, right? So our view is that countries will want to use leverage in Sri Lanka. They will want to pressure the Sri Lankan state. They would like to embarrass the Sri Lankan state, put pressure to a point where the local population in Sri Lanka, particularly the Sinhalese population, is embarrassed by their government and would think in terms of a regime change, or think in terms of pressurizing their local political representatives to cross parties, to destabilize the present incumbent. So, that is the sort of interest that we believe presently is being pursued by these countries. So what we don't want is to say that you want a referral to the ICC as a matter of sort of, as a principle, to just say that, but offer alternate avenues to escape, where they can get their interests satisfied by creating leverage without actually going to the ICC or actually referring Sri Lanka to a international criminal accountability mechanism. So we've been focused on the international criminal accountability part, and we have always said that any other alternative that we offer will only serve as a distraction that conveniently satisfies the interests of these states, right? So within this group of actors that drafted that letter, that is the TNA, the Mr. Vigneswaran's group, ourselves, and civil society, it was primarily Vigneswaran's group that actually was clamoring for Sri Lanka to be brought under agenda item 4 of the Human Rights Council. Currently, Sri Lanka is under agenda item 2. They want it to be brought under agenda item 4 with a specific reference to genocide and to create within the council. So within the Human Rights Council itself, they wanted to create sort of an investigative mechanism similar to the term they used is Syria as an example, but the Syrian IIIM program actually was established under the General Assembly. So I think what they really meant is something like Myanmar, which is under the Human Rights Council. So the parties at the initial stages agreed that since the Council's mandate, the Human Rights Council's mandate is so weak, without the consent of the respective state, nothing can be done. Accountability, we know the Sri Lankan state is not going to deliver on. So therefore, we must take accountability out of the council. That was agreed on the first day itself, right? But subsequently, since Mr. Vigneswaran's group came back and wanted to keep the investigative mechanism part within the council, there was a huge argument. Since they kept talking about Syria, it gave us an opportunity to actually clarify that Syria was actually established with the General Assembly and not the Council. And eventually they agreed on the condition that we have a request to the General Assembly to establish a IIIM Syria type mechanism. Now, our concern even with that was that it should not be open-ended. So even if we are going to create, even if we agree to such a mechanism, it has to be very clearly time-bound. And to that, eventually, Vigneswaran's group agreed. So it was a referral to the General Assembly to create a Syria-type IIIM program that was to have a time frame of 1 year mandate to investigate. So within that year, the IIIM will eventually come up with some sort of report. They will create files and all that that we have mentioned that ought to be done. The fact that the High Commissioner's report subsequently also mentions, evidence gathering, files being created for possible future prosecutions and all of that, also is covered with this IIIM General Assembly, request. So in the, all in all, as long as the IIIM program is not a convenient distraction, and since it's time bound, we believe that it won't be a distraction, and it won't just simply be used as leverage for geopolitical needs to achieve ends that they might not be able to achieve if it's purely a ICC thing. Since we believe that the time bound sort of approach would prevent that, we are quite satisfied with the letter that we eventually ended up with. May I also say this, Charan, we agreed, the three parties and civil society agreed that there will be a set of 3 letters. Actually, this is the first letter. And the main point of this first letter was to take accountability out of the Human Rights Council's agenda and move it up, right? So that was the purpose of this first letter, and that purpose is actually achieved very clearly, right? There are 4 operative paragraphs in that letter. The first operative paragraph very clearly says that it has to be taken out of the Human Rights Council, and that this must be a final resolution, right? The second letter, there was to be a follow-up letter, which is to the Secretary General, to the Security Council members, and to the ICC. It's a common letter, specifically talking about the sort of criminal accountability, obviously a referral to the ICC, and in addition, the various options of criminal accountability, international accountability mechanisms that can be pursued. A third letter, since we did agree on the IIIM sort of mechanism, there was to be a letter to the General Assembly, to the President and to the member states. And since we were going to write to the General Assembly members, we decided that we will also include Tamil political aspirations. So it will be that will be a quite a important letter. I mean, it basically puts forward for the first time, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Tamil political parties from the homeland have actually addressed jointly the entirety of the membership of the General Assembly. So it will be a crucial letter. I think it will be a letter that is groundbreaking in the sense that, given the context of the war, given the context that the whole world now accepts that heinous crimes have been committed against Tamils, the fact that Sri Lanka is on the international agenda, and all of that, coupled with the fact that we actually put forward what our political demands are, I think is probably the most important letter from my point of view, from a political point of view.
Just to clarify, when the fact that the IIIM has a time bound of 1 year, so was that not the case in Syria? It had more of a loose kind of time limit.
Well, I think in the case of Syria, the difference is that the crimes are ongoing. So the idea was to collect the evidence as it happens. In the case of the Ulam Tamil issue, it's a bit different. It's the vast majority of the crimes. I'm not saying that no crimes happen right now, but certainly the enormity of the crimes took place. It's in the past. So there is no need, especially if we are talking of the crime of genocide, there is no need to have an open-ended one, and it certainly does not serve the Tamils to have an open-ended one, given the sort of geopolitical considerations. You see, in Syria, Cheran, the West have decided that they want to go after the state, right? They're very clear about that. They believe that the Assad government has to go, and they're quite clear on that. They have made that very public, and they're going after the state. They want to break the state. In the case of Sri Lanka, that is not the case at all. Even today, the idea is that they will try and bring about a regime change, or if possible, if the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime decides to fall on its knees, then so be it. But they don't want to make the South sort of an enemy, right? So they're very mindful of that. And in that sort of backdrop, the danger here is that to have an open-ended sort of IIIM thing gives them sufficient sort of leverage, where there is this process where evidence is being gathered. You will have maybe the IIIM program reporting once a year, if not twice a year, to the General Assembly, saying, what they've been doing. So there will be this, show of ranking up of pressure, which might actually tip the balances in the domestic sort of political scene in the favor of the interests of these powers. What we don't want is like what happened in the last 10 years. You had a Human Rights Council process. You had regime change. The moment the regime changed, the pressure stopped. You had, for the last 6 years, 3 times extensions being given where the Ranil Wickremesinghe Sirisena government, which was pro-West, pro-India, just having the possibility of getting away doing absolutely nothing. So we don't want that to happen. I think we've suffered enough. We must make sure that that doesn't happen. So it was on that basis that we were insistent that if we are to refer a IIIM program, it has to be strictly time bound. I mean, the fact that if there is an ICC referral, whatever the IIIM that you want to do will also be done by the ICC. I mean, that's almost certain, right? But so by not having a IIIM and having an ICC process, we'll definitely have whatever that we expect from a IIIM happening under the ICC referral. But if if we have the IIIM, and if these countries get what they want with the IIIM alone, we might not see the ICC at all. So that is a risk that we run. That is a tremendous risk that we run. Of course, we did mention this to our colleagues, other political parties, and to civil society. But because the general view eventually was that it might not be a bad idea, and since they agreed for this time-bound mechanism, we agreed.
Right. Okay. I see. Kind of along the lines of the process of releasing this letter and the discussions that you would have had with the other bodies and organizations involved, the word genocide has huge legal implications and symbolic implications for our people. And is it true that some of the parties involved in the publication, whether that be literal parties or civil society organizations, did not actually want the word genocide to be used in the letter?
No, that allegation has actually oddly been made against us, the TNPF, particularly myself. And the accusation is that I'm the guy who's been talking about genocide since 2009, long before anyone else spoke about it. I'm the one who's adamant about it. I've gone abroad. I go wherever I go, to the UN or wherever, I don't fail to mention it. Whereas when this process started with this, with regards to these letters, that I was either my voice was muted or that I was not in favor of it. That's a blatant lie. with the parties who have made these accusations. I think they are they are probably the least credible actors in the Tamil political scene today. So I don't want to, talk beyond that. But that's not true. Even the TNA, even Sumandran, of course, Sumandran, whilst he agreed to sign up to the sign up to genocide, did say that he personally did not believe that it can be proved. But having said that, he's the only guy who showed some sort of reluctance. The TNA constituents had no problems with it at all. So that is not correct. I mean, once again, I think this story about someone being reluctant is pointed at myself and the TNPF, and that is the furthest from the truth in reality.
Right. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up. And again, on the process of publishing this letter, is it true that Dr. Parkia Sodi, Saravanamuttu, and Bhavani Fonseca of the Colombo-based NGO Center for Policy Alternatives, or CPA for short, they were consulted in the process of publishing this letter, and if so, what was their input?
No, they were not consulted at all. The CPA did come into the scene for one occasion, and that was for the meeting that was held on the 6th of January. That meeting was actually organized almost a month before, because the CPA is interested in the Human Rights Council agenda. I mean, that's not, that's pretty obvious. But the fact that there was no real meaningful sort of dialogue between the Tamil actors, particularly the three Tamil formations that eventually came on board for this signing of this letter, and the only three Tamil formations that actually showed some interest in the Geneva process or beyond. The fact that we were not talking amongst ourselves and there was no real proper dialogue about Geneva taking place, the CPA at least approached me on that basis, saying that, look, can we just meet unofficially and discuss? And I had no problems with that. I speak to the CPA. I disagree with them on most things. So I have no problems in talking. I have no problems in talking with the other Tamil parties either. So I, in principle, agreed. I said that I won't come alone. I'll obviously bring some colleagues along, and that was fixed for the 6th of January, almost 3 to 4 weeks earlier. So the Tamil civil society run process that eventually came out with these letters actually started after that, after this meeting on the 6th was fixed. And so once this meeting of the civil society started, in the very first meeting that we took part in, which was on the 3rd of January, we all spoke about this meeting that was to happen on the 6th. And we decided unanimously that it would be quite rude to just simply turn around and tell the CPA that we will not come because we've started something here. We'll go. And since they are also involved in the Geneva process, they are also quite active. We will go, we will share our views with them, but ultimately we'll say that whatever that has to be done within the Tamil parties with regards to a consensus position and all of that, we'll do ourselves with the Tamil society actors back in the home. So that was all the role that they played. And eventually, it wasn't a role at all, because ultimately we had a good dinner, and then that process just ended. So if someone is trying to create the impression that the CPA was involved and it is they who are driving this process. That is a blatant lie, and that is I think there must be some sinister motives behind trying to create that sort of false propaganda.
Okay, thanks for demystifying that as well. Just a final question from me. You've mentioned already the huge importance of the ICC and the sort of relevance of that to everything. What is the outlook on the ICC referral, and how do you rate the chance of success there?
I think it's better than it's ever been. Before 2 years ago, the only way a non-member to the Rome Statute could be referred to the ICC is through the Security Council. That was the general practice. But since Myanmar, where the ICC, went out of its way to find ways of referring Myanmar, investigating Myanmar through alternate means, I think that sets a very strong precedent. So that same sort of logic has followed through. So if you look at how, in the case of Afghanistan, the crimes that took place in Afghanistan are being investigated, but the United States is also being investigated for its role in Afghanistan. So things like that. I think things that would have never been contemplated by most before, since the last 2 years, I think are happening now. So the ICC is also, I think, fully aware that we are going into a polarized world. We are going into another sort of similar Cold War. I mean, that is certainly our take. And increasingly, what you might have is in a place like the Security Council, you'll probably have major powers, the permanent members using their veto powers, particularly China and Russia. So, I mean, given that, if the ICC to remain credible, I think within the ICC itself, there must be a very clear debate going on with regards to how they're going to handle this situation. I think that's the only reason why you have this shift. So my view is that since the last 2 years, I think there are better chances of Sri Lanka being actually investigated. I think there's quite a good chance if we get our act together. But I think once again, I think we are our biggest enemy because, no soon after these Tamil parties agreed to call for a referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC and wrote this letter, you had members of the signatory group to this letter, people like Mr. Sumandran, who've come out openly and said that, even though we have said genocide has taken place and that there must be a referral of the ICC, referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC, I don't think people should have any hope. He said this not only with regards to the letter that we wrote, but even after the High Commissioner's report says that Sri Lanka must be referred to the ICC, he's been saying the same thing, that we must not have any hope with regards to a referral to the ICC. So I mean, when you have people, and this is a official spokesman of the TNA who out of 17 members of parliament elected in the Northeast, the TNA has 10. So when you have the official spokesman of the TNA saying such things, obviously it makes it a bit difficult for people such as us who actually want this referral to actually happen. And I'm pretty certain that a vast majority of the Tamil people who are the victims who would want this to happen, because that's the only chance of a proper accountability taking place. It's self-defeating. So I think given this context, there are challenges, and those challenges to a great part is created by ourselves.
Just a final quick follow-up question, actually, on that point, where the TNA, it's quite clear that they're a bit of an obstacle full success with their sort of self-defeating sort of statements and approach to things. How can we navigate that, considering their parliamentary representation?
Well, the fact is that they did sign. And the fact is that they did sign, and the fact is that I mean, that's the how I sort of try and explain it to our people. I mean, even yesterday there were a few meetings that I attended to where people were quite upset with what Sumandran had said, and I said, can he say anything else? I mean, here is a man who sort of poo-pooed this whole process of the ICC referral and genocide, but he himself is forced to sign up to it. So what else can he say? I mean, after all, he also has to go and say something. So this is his way of saying it, I guess. So I don't think you should take him seriously. So that is the sort of general way in which I deal with the Tamil people. But once again, what I'm trying to say is that it's not the Tamil people. I mean, we want what we want. But you have international actors who also want what they want, and when you have actors such as Sumandran or the TNA, whilst they sign certain documents, maybe probably for local domestic consumption and to try and in some way salvage some part of their credibility, which they have been losing steadily over the last 10 years. Nonetheless, when you say something like this, you have international actors who don't really want a referral to the ICC, quite conveniently use these sort of statements to justify their own agenda. So I think that is the danger, and that is the real problem. I mean, I have no doubts that the TNA will get even more discredited by what Sumandran has said, but even though they get discredited, the fact is that you have, for the next 5 years, the TNA as the single largest party representing the Tamil people in the Northeast. And no matter what happens, that reality is going to last for the next 5 years. And these sort of statements can only serve people other than the Tamils. So that is a huge challenge. I mean, the TNA has been, in my view, our biggest challenge. I don't think people like Douglas Devanand or Angajan Ramanathan or Pulliyana challenges, because they are known. I mean, they are not going to grow. This is the maximum that they can get, But it is the TNA who say that they are for Tamil rights and Tamil interests, and then they go and do things like this. That is actually the problem, so we'll have to in some way deal with it. I mean, our way of doing it is we expose. We are criticized also. I mean, people like this false notion of unity. So the moment we all sign this letter, they, the media in particular here, want to create the impression that we must not criticize each other, but we're not going to give in to that. Our only way of making sure that we stay on track is to expose when people are trying to cheat our people, that we expose them at every turn, and we will continue to do that, even if it means that people misunderstand and we lose popularity. It doesn't matter. We did this 10 years ago. It is because we did this 10 years ago that we've been able to come to this position now, right? And bring the TNA on to what we've been saying for the last 10 years, even though we are just only 2 members of parliament, right? So it is this approach that has been able to create this reality, and we will continue down that path.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much for answering my questions and rounding up this first segment. We're going to take a 5-minute break now, so everyone can stretch their legs or get a glass of water or whatever, and then we'll resume straight away with the second half of the segment, which will be the Q&A from you guys at home with the questions that you've posted in. So yeah, keep posting them in, and I'll be able to take a look at them and field them to Gajendrakumar accordingly. So yeah, just keep getting the questions in, and then in 5 minutes we'll resume with me getting your questions through to Gajendrakumar. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Let's get back to the second half of this segment. So yeah, just as I've said in the chat, if you just keep posting any questions that you want me to field, and I'll go through them. And if once they've all been gone through, if time allows, I'll unmute those that have raised their hands that you can ask questions directly. And please bear in mind that we'll be finishing in about an hour's time. So that's the sort of time restrictions we're working to. I can just see. Yep. So the first question from Ardavan is, what if veto power is used to prevent referrals to the ICC in the Security Council?
Yeah, I mean, there is that possibility, of course. That is if the Security Council is the only avenue through which we can have a referral. As I said, as of 2 years ago, I think the ICC itself is looking at alternate means of investigating countries that non-member countries that have been violating international law. Myanmar is a very good example. But the question of veto, I mean, I will admit that, or I will agree that the risk of veto being used by countries is greater with the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime now in power. The countries that are most likely to use it are, of course, China and Russia. The United States being the country that actually sort of brought this UN Human Rights Council process, where they were the ones who first brought the resolution, moved the resolution in the council, would mean that it's, you know, if they decide that they want to take someone wants to refer to the ICC, it's very unlikely that the US will veto it. Britain and France over the last, I think since the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, since 87, have never used their veto. I mean, as a matter of principle, they don't do it. They abstain, if at all, if they disagree. China as well. I mean, China has, to the best of my knowledge, has used the veto the least. And the general tendency seems to be that if China is directly implicated in some sort of resolution, that's the only time that they have that they would use it. So it's Russia. Russia too has used it. I mean, in the context particularly of the Cold War, the USSR was the one that used it the most. But in today's context, it is the United States that has used in the post-Cold War situation. It's the United States that used the veto the most. But so, and Russia also, I mean, whenever they use it, it's normally when their interests are directly involved. I can't see Sri Lanka being a direct sort of interest of Russia. You know, so whilst the general talk seems to be that the veto will be used, I'm not all that convinced. But still, my view is that the ICC has alternate means under Article 15, where the prosecutor can use her own powers to start investigations, which is what she did with regards to Myanmar. I think there are possibilities of getting an investigation on Sri Lanka started through alternate means, particularly through Article 15, where the prosecutor takes it upon herself to commence an investigation. Of course, she will have to in some way create jurisdiction or show that she satisfies jurisdiction, and I believe in similar to how she was able to satisfy the pre-trial chamber with regards to Myanmar. I think there are enough opportunities to satisfy the ICC pre-trial chamber with regards to Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you. Another question also from
May I
Ardavan.
also say this,
Sorry.
Chair? I think that whoever asked that question, I think there might be this misconception that we are only targeting the ICC, that we only want the ICC. That's another sort of deliberate propaganda that is being sort of done against us. What we are saying is within this UN structure, within this multilateral framework, the ICC is the only option within that. Of course, you have universal jurisdiction that we have never opposed. You have the option of a state referring Sri Lanka to the ICJ. That is not something that we have opposed. On the contrary, in our meetings, we have at various times, in fact, suggested that. So the point is, when you're talking about the UN, the ICC is, in our view, given this multilateral sort of structure, the ICC is the only forum. If you can't get the Sri Lankan state to consent to a process, then the only other way is through the ICC referral. So we don't have any options within this UN structure, right? So that is what we are saying, that you have to go down that path if ever the Tamils are to have accountability. But that does not mean that that is the only path, and we have never shut the door on alternates, right? And even with regards to that letter, it says by referring Sri Lanka to the ICC and other credible alternative international criminal accountability mechanisms. So we are quite clear about that. But the ICC certainly has to be pursued. I don't think it's in any way something that is beyond the pale. I think it is a realistic option. I think increasingly it will become even more credible and more realistic, as long as we don't, for political cheap reasons, within ourselves, try and defeat it.
Okay, and again from Ardavan, he asks for your comments on the notion that Gurupuran of Adialam Center for Policy Research had an influence on the joint statement along with Samandaran. What's your take on that?
Well, it's not just Guru. I mean, the fact is that there were 4 people who were involved in the drafting of the final letter. It was myself, it was Vigneswaran, it was Sumandran, and Guru on behalf of the civil society. So that is a fact. Guru, by the way, along with me, were the 2 who sort of insisted on genocide being included. We were also the ones who eventually agreed on referral to the ICC in the way in which it eventually came. So yeah, I think if at all Guru's role has been extremely positive, at least certainly from my point of
view. This is from Veerasingham Kurlarasu, which asks, if Sri Lanka compromises and sides with the West or India and satisfies its geopolitical interests, wouldn't they abandon IIIM or any such mechanisms? And what course could Tamil people take in such an eventuality?
They'll abandon it tomorrow.
Right, okay. I think you kind of already addressed this, but I'll just ask it just in case you have anything more to say. How would China impact the decisions made at the UN Human Rights Council? Even though it seems the West will try to take action against Sri Lanka, wouldn't China's influence prevent that?
There is that possibility. I mean, I think the fact that you have to get a majority means that there'll be a great sense of lobbying that goes on. But within the Human Rights Council and the dynamics that I am aware of, I mean, just to the previous question, I just gave a one-liner, but I mean, the reality is very difficult for this government to sort of just give up the China tilt and move the other way. I think I think that's almost impossible to contemplate. Uh, and that is the reason why you have countries like the United States and others, at least seemingly taking a more principled position this time around. Yeah. So given those dynamics, the Human Rights Council will be a heavily contested um, arena. But this time, unlike previous times, you see countries like the countries in the African Union, the Middle East, most of the sort of non-Western allied countries have been the ones who've been favoring the Rajapaksas, right? And sort of defending Sri Lanka almost, a blanket sort of defense of Sri Lanka. But if you look at what's been happening within Sri Lanka, particularly with regards to the Muslim population, the Tamils, the fact that the Tamils have been suffering and all that has been well known. These countries have chosen to support Sri Lanka despite the fact that they knew or they have known what had happened to the Tamils, right? That is because they had this, to a great extent, countries that don't have a geopolitical interest in Sri Lanka but have been supporting Sri Lanka. It's been primarily because they sort of have this nagging feeling that whatever it is, the Tamils have been anti-state. Okay, the Tamils have rebelled against the state. They have challenged the state. They took arms against the state. So the state naturally has to defend itself and has done various things. So to some extent, they were prepared to overlook all of that. But when you look at what's been happening since the end of the war, particularly with regards to Muslims, and most of these African countries also have a very strong Muslim, if not are in fact Muslim dominated, you would find that Sri Lanka this is not a question of a challenge to the state. It's actually the state. It is actually the state that is going after the non-Sinhala Buddhists. It is the state that's the problem. It's the state that is actually racist. And that comes out quite clearly. I remember we were in Geneva. I personally was in Geneva. I believe it was 2014 in January. So there was a council resolution that was supposed to come up in March 2014. I remember me spending almost a month in Geneva, and I, along with a few colleagues, our main focus was the African countries. Because there was a tendency by these African countries to sort of, because it was a resolution in the Human Rights Council that was being sort of, pushed by the US, the African countries' approach was like, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with this. If it's the US, then, we know what they do in Africa. They use the human rights issues to meddle with the internal politics of these countries, and they generally have that sort of no, we're not going to support this, and if at all, we'll stand on the other side. So when we met these countries, what we said is, well, we have the same view. Our criticism of this resolution is that it actually is not victim-centric. That the US is trying to use this as leverage to create regime change, or in some way have some sort of leverage within the domestic political scene, and that is our criticism. But the fact is that as victims, we want a resolution that is strong. Our criticism is that this resolution is weak. They are only embarrassing the Sri Lankan government. They are not actually, asking for things from the side of the victims. So why doesn't Africa or the countries in Africa take up a principled position given your history? So that was the sort of lobbying that we did. And believe it or not, I personally was shocked. Those African countries got back. After almost 3 weeks of continuous lobbying, we were contacted by a very influential African country saying that, speak to the coordinator of the African Union for that year, that the African Union has meetings every Friday in the mornings, and that they will allocate on a convenient time during the sessions and give us 30 minutes to make a presentation to the to all the members of the union. So what I'm saying is that, whilst there is this possibility of a very heavily contested Human Rights Council when it comes to this resolution, I believe that since this is no longer just simply a question of the Tamils, that this is something larger, that the Sri Lankan state is going after everybody else, I think the attitudes of countries that generally don't have a direct geopolitical interest can shift in the side of being towards the side of being principled, which means obviously it will favor a strong sort of resolution.
Okay. The next question is from Siddharshan, who asks, have you considered reaching out to parliamentary offices abroad and maintaining relationships? The APPG, All Party Parliamentary Group for Tamils, group of MPs that focus on Sri Lanka has been lobbied by Human Rights Watch, ICG, etc. And a debate on Sri Lanka has been scheduled for the second week of Feb. MPs' offices and the APPGT would be very receptive to hearing from parliamentary colleagues in the Tamil homeland that are unafraid to speak robustly.
Yeah, we're very open to that. I mean, obviously you have the letter. I mean, so it's a letter signed by these political formations and civil society here. I think there have been a number of endorsements that have happened both locally and amongst the diaspora organizations to that letter. I mean, given the present reality of COVID-19 and all of that, as to how that sort of campaign can take place, I'm not too certain. But I think diaspora, I mean, they have something concrete that has already come out. There are 2 more letters that are due to come out. I hope they come out sooner than later. So you yourselves as diaspora organizations, I mean, if you want something credible, to share with the sort of parliamentary lobby groups, as what was mentioned, I mean, yourselves have sufficient sort of information and documents and etc. But in addition to that, I mean, if there is possibility of virtual sort of meetings and all of that, then obviously you'll have a cooperation, without doubt. We are meeting with all the missions here. I mean, we, even more than us wanting to meet them, they themselves want to meet us and find out. That is across the board, not just our party. So, there is a lot of engagement already. But as you said, I quite agree. I mean, meeting the High Commission or meeting embassies is one thing, but meeting political actors on the ground who can actually shape the position that the UK, for example, can take, I think is another. So for example, if we are unhappy like what we hear, where the UK has been sort of being the key member of the core group, has been sort of rumors coming out saying that they are thinking in terms of a consensual resolution. If we can in some way make sure that that doesn't happen, obviously we'll give our fullest cooperation.
Thank you. The next question is from S, which says, the Tamil genocide began long before 2009. The joint letter by the Tamil parties seems to concentrate on the events of 2009. Will the requested evidence gathering mechanism also look into covering genocidal events orchestrated by the government of Sri Lanka from before 2009?
Yes, of course. I mean, this is where I think the Human Rights High Commissioner's report this time around was crucial. Because, as I said, I mean, the report makes the point that the armed struggle was a consequence of a systematic discrimination and anti-Tamil measures. So the armed struggle, whatever crimes that took place, all of that is put in the context of the 72-year history, right? Because the Tamil national question or the Tamil ethnic problem as such. We refer to as having commenced way back since 1948. So that context is set, and which means for everything that happens now, this is just a snapshot of, of a continuum. So to try and understand what happened here, you need to actually look back. So my view is that is almost, it is an absolute must. We will certainly lobby very hard for that. We've been making the point from the very inception that when you look at Sri Lanka for investigations, you have to take the context of the last 72 years, and we will insist on that, because to look at the mental element, to look at to try and figure out what actually happened, to try and figure out what the motives of each of the actors were. It is impossible if you don't look at the whole history. And I think this Human Rights Council report only strengthens the case of people such as the person who asked me this question, and myself and our party, who say that you have to go back quite a long way.
Okay. This is a question from Murali. When will you and the other two parties, and presumably the other civil society organizations as well, send the follow-up second and third letters to the member states of the Human Rights Council?
I think Mr. Murali should write to the other two parties and say that we should do it as soon as possible. I wrote a letter about over a week ago, almost 10 days ago, asking that we should meet again and discuss. But I have not got a single reply to that email. I spoke to civil society actors about 3 or 4 days ago. They said that they will get in touch with the other political parties, but they haven't done so far. I mean, they haven't got back to me so far. But pressure coming from outside will be a good thing. I mean, these are parties, after all, who given about 2 or 3 years ago, would never have signed this letter. So sort of pressure has worked. I think more pressure will help.
This is a question from Sujin. Which countries are supporting the Elam Tamils at the moment?
I don't think any country is supporting in that sense. I don't think it is any country's interest at the moment. I don't think it's any country's interest at the moment to support Elam Tamil interest. I presume is the recognition of the Tamil nation, to recognize genocide and if at all go beyond. But that's not the point. I mean, as I've always said, countries will look at their interests, and it's always going to be that. So there's no point in asking countries to being able for us to trust a country, or who's going to do the right thing or whatever. I mean, you need to get things done. You need to act in a way where you don't give options. You try and narrow down the options for this geopolitical game, so that you also get something out of it. As long as we are focused on that, then I think we can work. But if we believe that we need to sort of fall at the feet of these countries, do whatever they want us to do, and that is the only way that we can try and sort of convince them to also do something for us, then we'll have a continuum of the last 10 years for the next 10 years.
So a question from KP. To what extent will current developments under the current regime with regards to increased colonization of traditionally Tamil areas factor into this case?
No, that question wasn't clear. Increase.
To what extent will current developments under the current regime in terms of increased colonization of traditionally Tamil areas factor into this case? The case, no, I'm guessing, being, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is part of the fact that they are going after the Tamils. I mean, that fits in quite conveniently to establish the point that we are trying to make, as Tamils. So, I mean, they might have done whatever that they did whilst the war was on, and to a great extent tried to justify it. But I think they just can't justify it anymore. And if they're doing it after 10 years, and that too 10 years after, then it's quite obvious what the intentions are. I think the important point here is that the Rajapaksa regime that is now in power is actually quite honest, ironically. Yeah, they are showing what they actually want to do. I mean, they're showing their true face. But the 4.5 years that we had of Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe did the same thing. Did absolutely the same thing. I mean, the UNP at the last local government elections had a manifesto saying that they will build 1,000 Buddhist viharas, right? So, I mean, that is how blatant they were in reality, but it was muddied by people like the TNA trying to make them out to be goodies, and by they themselves talking the sort of liberal talk. So so in that sense, I think the fact that you have the Rajapaksas in power, where they are doing what they're doing very openly, and wearing their racism very flamboyantly, I think only makes it easier for us to sort of prove the obvious.
There's a question from Ahash. You mentioned there might be some more obstacles on the way after the release of this report. Can you give some color on what your expectations are in it and explain further?
Again, I didn't follow that question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned in the before the break that there might be some more obstacles on the way after the release of this report. Can you kind of explain further what your expectations are of these obstacles?
Well, I mean, obviously obstacles are obstacles. So expectations are that we need to get over them. As to what they are, I mean, no, I mean, what I'm saying is that the report in itself was something positive. The obstacles are with regards to how the states will use the report. Already, where you have a fairly principled report, a report that has come quite far from the first reports that came out, and on the question of even saying refer Sri Lanka to the ICC, and that is the sort of strongest position that one can possibly take under this setup, right? So whilst you have a report like that, for countries to go and then thereafter, from whatever news items that we're getting now, for these core group members to go and approach the Sri Lankan government and say that we'd like a consensual resolution, what that means is that they're using this as leverage for their geopolitical interests. So, I mean, that is going to happen. What I'm saying is that will happen. That's the difference between the High Commissioner's office and member states, right? Member states will work with their interests and they will do this. We must be careful to make sure that we do not create leverage for them to use to achieve their ends without we ourselves getting what we want. So that has been the criticism that I have been leveling against the TNA and a number of diaspora organizations, because they actually made sure that those countries had the leverage that they needed to achieve their ends, whereas the victims ultimately fell between the stools. So that danger still exists. I mean, as I said, we had a resolution, we had a letter that was written. The next day, you had probably the largest member of the three parties, the TNA, coming out and saying that whilst we did say that genocide has to be investigated, and whilst we did say that Sri Lanka must be referred to the ICC, don't expect any of that to happen. I mean, then why would anybody in their right minds actually pursue that? If we ourselves don't believe that that is possible, then it's just tokenism that we are doing. And that is the sort of message that you're giving to the countries that you want to act. So I think that is the danger. On the one side, you have the states who will pursue their interest, and if they have leverage that is enough without actually addressing matters from a victim's point of view, they will stop it with that. And when you have Tamil actors themselves to cooperate with that agenda, those are the sort of dangers that we have to face, and that those are massive dangers. I think the fact that we ourselves are our biggest enemy, I think is I don't think I can possibly sort of understate that. I mean, I have always said that we are our biggest enemy. Our own political actors are our biggest enemy.
This is a question from Triraja Pushparaja. Suppose if Sri Lanka is referred to the ICC by the UN Human Rights Council, what sanctions could they make against Sri Lanka if found guilty?
Well, I'm not sure the ICC will make sanctions, but certainly if they're found guilty, countries will hopefully act on it, and that is what we expect.
Okay. A lot of questions. This is a question from Stalin. One of TMPF's election promises was to collect evidence for mounting cases for genocide. How has TMPF been implementing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certain things that obviously we don't want to discuss too widely, but I mean, from our point of view, we've been trying to facilitate evidence to be safeguarded, to be in some way documented. We've been doing that for a long time. We've been making public various matters, to put on record the context in which, so for example, things that might have happened that have not been focused in the past, we've brought focus to. So all of that we're doing. But the nitty-gritties, I think, there is only a limited, there's only a small, it's a limited sort of thing that I can actually speak about.
Yeah, fair enough. This is a question from Mon Tamil. What is the current aspirations of Tamils on the island for nationhood?
Sorry, what's the current
aspirations of Tamils on the island for nationhood?
For nationhood?
Yeah.
My goodness. I mean, if you have people like Gajendrakumar and Douglas Devananda also saying that they are also for Tamil nationhood and that they are for uplifting Tamil nationhood, then I think it's almost 100%. Wouldn't you say that? I mean, they're probably the only ones who you would have thought wouldn't talk about nationhood, but they were the ones who were up there. I mean, Douglas Devananda's every post, Tamil Tesam Tale Nimira, which means for the rise of the Tamil nation. I mean, how more blatant can you be about wanting Tamil nation? But I mean, on a serious point, I mean, the fact that without even people like Douglas Devananda, who are not Tamil nationalists, who are very clearly, their past is that they're a paramilitary group. They fully cooperated with the Sri Lankan state to completely defeat any possibility of Tamil nationhood being recognized through the liberation struggle. All of that, even despite being an organization that behaved in that way, if today, and that too 10 years after the war, right? 10 years after the war, that they have to also speak the language of nationhood to stand even some chance of getting elected, I think shows how very clear the Tamil people are here with regards to what their aspirations and goals are.
The second part of Montamo's question is, considering the ongoing structural invasion of the homeland, what avenues can Elam Tamils take to safeguard their territory?
Well, I mean, here again, I mean, in practical terms, the only way in which you can do that is by single-mindedly pursuing the question of accountability. I mean, if you don't have criminal prosecutions taking place, and if you don't, if you're not seen as being serious on the question of accountability, why would the government want to stop? There has to be some break in this vicious circle, and the only way in which you could do that is to pursue accountability, and that's the only way in which the actors on the ground will, take at least one step back and think, hang on, if we continue with this, maybe we'll get into a lot of trouble. And the reality on the ground is also that you have a government that has a 2/3 majority, so they are not. I mean, there is no need for them to turn around and look at anyone else. They have all the power that they need. Quote unquote legally. So the options are very limited with regards to how to sort of stop the actions that are taking place on the ground. But above that, obviously, the idea of mobilization of the general public, particularly the Tamils in the northeast, and hopefully in due course the Muslims as well. Mobilization, I think, is crucial. But again, the problem with mobilization now is the very global problem of health risks. With this COVID-19 and all that. So these are the unfortunate sort of constraints with regards to other options. Presently, I think the most realistic option is to single-mindedly pursue the accountability issue.
Okay. We just had another question about Adi Alam actually from Ardavan, Adi Alam, who is characterized as a Western puppet organization. What's your take on organizations like Adi Alam interfering in Tamil affairs, and are they belittling the Tamil liberation movement?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think, to the best of my knowledge, Adi Alam, has not acted in that way. I might not agree with everything that Adi Alam says, but I certainly will not come anywhere close to making the sort of allegations that the gentleman made. I think more likely is the people who actually today are the greatest risk of defeating Tamil aspirations are, quite honestly, at the risk of being sort of politically partisan or whatever that you might accuse me of, is actually the TNA and Vignesan's party. I mean, you can't talk of Tamil nationhood and liberation on the one side and say that you want the unitary state 13th Amendment because India wants it on the other. Both don't go. So I think, whereas I don't believe Adi Alam has ever said something like that. You don't talk about, on the one hand, you don't talk about the military doing all sorts of things, and then when you get an opportunity to oppose the defense budget, you don't go and hide. So I think we must be, we must put things in perspective. I think there are bigger enemies blatantly acting to defeat Tamil aspirations, and I think those people must be actually, called for what they are. I mean, if I am produced with the sort of proof that the gentleman is talking of, then I'm certainly willing to consider it. But I'm thus far yet to see anything remotely close to what the TNA and others are doing to defeat Tamil aspirations and Tamil interests.
Okay, yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Looking for a question. Do you believe that pursuing accountability and reconciliation goals in the international arena is a durable solution to the Tamil national question that will satisfy our aspirations? And that's from Wilfred Wilson.
Do you believe?
Do you believe pursuing accountability and reconciliation goals in the international arena will allow for a durable solution to the Tamil national question that will satisfy the aspirations of our people?
It's not that I believe. That those are things that you have to handle. I mean that's the reality. We don't have an armed struggle today. Politically, I mean, if you're just looking at democracy and this political space that quote unquote democracy offers in Sri Lanka, there is very little. So what are your opportunities? I mean, what is the leverage? The leverage is, as I have always said, it is the international politics that surrounds Sri Lanka. Of course, you have some who will sort of belittle that and try and say that there is no geopolitical interest or something like that, which I totally disagree with. I mean, if you look at geopolitics and if you look at what's been happening in the last as long as you want, actually, the only yardstick that will sort of make sense, the only sort of how do you call it? The only sort of theory that would make sense is geopolitics. I mean, that's the only thing that can explain how countries and actors have been behaving with regards to the Tamils and with regards to Sri Lanka over the last so many decades. And also, that is the only thing that can accurately predict how countries will behave in the future. So my view is that one needs to properly be able to handle geopolitics, and if we do, then I think we can make progress. I mean, my criticism about the TNA and others who actually were in a strong position with vis-a-vis the Tamil people's mandate is that they chose not to do that at all. On the contrary, they just completely went and were quite simply willing to do whatever these foreign actors were willing to do. So they chose a side, right? They chose which side they wanted to be on, and they didn't go and bargain for the Tamil people. They just went on the presumption that if they do whatever that these actors wanted, then hopefully at the end of it that they will turn around and do something for the Tamils. And 10 years down the road, people like Sumandran had to admit that they have lost. So I think if we can work within those within that framework, I think we can try and manage this. I mean, that's the only option you have. That's the only realistic option that you have.
Another question here from Sagi Dilipkumar. She asks, what is your view on India's role at the moment?
Well, I mean, India is pursuing its interests. India is quite concerned that China's presence is a national security issue. In the 1980s, they threatened a war with Sri Lanka because they were at that time in a Cold War context. They were threatened by the United States increasing influence in Sri Lanka. They created a situation where Sri Lanka signed the Indo-Lanka Accord, which essentially brought Sri Lanka within India's sphere of influence. Sri Lanka gave several several assurances that Sri Lanka will not allow itself to be used by a third country that can in any way jeopardize India's national security or its national interests. So, uh, you know, since 1987, you've come a full circle where China is already, to a great extent, having a presence here. So that India is taking at every possible level, taking opportunities to tell the Sri Lankan government that they are not very comfortable with what's happening is obvious. Um, it's obvious, but the fact that they are using the Tamils also is even more obvious. I mean, the message that Sri Lanka is giving Sri Lanka now is that on the one hand, they have their allies to try and put up the pressure on the question of accountability. On the other, they have their Tamil sort of parties that cooperate with them, that do whatever they say, to talk about the 13th Amendment, which is a unitary state structure. So, the message that they're giving is that whilst we will increase accountability issues and give you a hard time, and may even think in terms of going further, if you fall in line, one will contain the Tamil struggle within the unitary 13th Amendment. So, I mean, those are the options that India is giving. And as a country, as a regional power, and as a future aspirant of being a global power, I mean, the fact that they would do that, I think, is something to be expected.
Okay. We talked a bit about the consensual resolution and what the foreign secretary came out with recently. What other tactics, sorry, this is from 49, 69, 639. What kind of tactics do you expect the Sri Lankan government to use to get away with this proposal?
Get away from the report.
Yeah, sorry, the report.
Well, I think it's very difficult, to be quite honest. I mean, whilst there is this talk about a consensual resolution, I think that's the only way in which they can, to a great extent, try and buy time. But I mean, given the fact that this report has come out in the way it has, I think to a great extent it will also tie the hands of the core group and others who want to compromise. If they can strike a deal, there is only so much that you can actually compromise. So, given that context, and given the local dynamics of Sri Lanka, in the way in which they are portraying how they're standing up to the West, that the West are, the enemy and all of that, and then all of a sudden to agree to a consensus resolution with the West, I think again that will be, also quite controversial locally. So, I mean, the chances of my personal view is the chances of a consensual resolution, I think, is a bit low. But you never know. I mean, that's the only way that Sri Lanka can, in some way, try and sort of mitigate and bring the pressure down. I think there is no other way that they can bring the pressure down. But of course, I mean, if they can succeed in just keeping Sri Lanka within the Human Rights Council, now then that's great. I mean, I think they've won. I mean, the best thing that they can happen is to continue like the last 10 years, where you will have this drama of the West standing up, or countries standing up and speaking on behalf of the Tamils, and you have this singular Buddhist nationalist sort of champion standing up to the whole world and saying that we've saved the Sinhalese. That's ideal, without having any consequences to face. So this is why we said, I mean, I think as far as the Tamils are concerned, we must be absolutely single-minded in making sure that accountability is taken out of the Human Rights Council and moved up. And for as long as we stay within the council, we'll never reach accountability. And the only way we can reach accountability is to move it out and to just single-mindedly pursue that option elsewhere.
Okay, just a bit wary of the time. We actually only have 10 minutes left as planned. Is it possible, just because of the volume of questions, to extend by another 15 minutes?
Yeah, I don't mind, but I'm pretty sure that these questions are all repetitive. I mean, you've been through the whole gamut of issues.
Let's have a look.
No, go on.
Okay, this is a question from KP. What are your thoughts on Mr. Jaishankar's statement on the 13th Amendment? Is this India's red line regarding the Tamil issue? Do you think the government will accommodate Indian interests as they are apparently doing with the Eastern Terminal?
No, my view is that the Indian interest is the Eastern Terminal. It just makes sense to give it to the Indians because, I mean, after all, the transshipment, the vast majority of it is towards India anyway. So it just makes business sense. But India's interest is not the Eastern Terminal. India's interest is that they don't want anyone else in the neighborhood. They don't want China in the Western Terminal. They don't want China in strategic, having control over strategic assets. That is what India wants, and that is not going. You cannot balance India with others, right? Strategically, as far as India is concerned, if any other country is seen to have a strategic presence in Sri Lanka, that is a no-no. And my view is that China is fast becoming that, if not already.
Okay, great. I think just on the format. Sorry.
The 13th Amendment again. I mean, that is as far as we are concerned. We've come out quite openly. We've said it. I've met with the Indian mission here, and I've said it to them also. I mean, we have no issues with the Sri Lanka Accord. I mean, there are shortcomings in it, but we will by no means reject it. But we will not accept the 13th Amendment as an implementation of the Accord. That is something. Whilst we don't reject the Accord, we will certainly not accept the 13th Amendment. We'll reject it, and we will campaign very heavily for the Tamil people to reject it.
Okay, great. I think just to mix it up a little bit, I'll ask a couple more questions from the chat, and then if you guys could put your hand up, then I can allow you to ask the question directly. So we'll just take a couple more questions before that. I think this is definitely a question we've not had before. So this is from Dusian. He asks, looking internally, there are elements of casteism, misogyny, and sexism amongst the Tamil nation, both in the homeland and diaspora. What work is the TMPF doing in addressing that?
Well, at the moment, we are only trying to work within our party. We have very unfortunately not been able to do much work on that. But I mean, unless we start with our own organization, I don't think we are going to be ever credible when we go to the public. And we have a long way to go even within the organization. That is a tragedy. I mean, just to a simple issue, we had quite a good conference on gender about I think 2 years ago, in 2018, and we had a declaration. One of the targets was that the TNPF will field a minimum of 30% of candidates when it comes to elections. And we also have a goal of maintaining that within our own party structures. At the last parliamentary elections, we didn't feel it. I mean, out of 10, we only had 2 women in Jaffna. In other districts, it was similar, if not less. So it is not something that we are proud of. So I mean, uh, I think it's a. I personally didn't think that it would be so much of a struggle, but I'm actually quite shocked with regards to how difficult it is to get things to change. One of the reasons is that with regards to within the party to find candidates, um, it's even if we have a situation where one of so it's the husband or the wife, one party agrees, the other disagrees. That is the sort of situation that we face right across. So I mean, that is just one example. I think on that side we are failing miserably. Not just as a party, as an organization in itself. I'm saying, as a people, it's a disaster. Certainly in the homeland, it's a disaster.
Okay. You slightly touched upon this already with the APPGT question, but this is from Proud to be a supporter of TMPF East London. He asks, regarding the forthcoming UN Council meeting, how can Tamils in foreign countries beyond COVID-19 restrictions work together to support Sri Lanka being referred to the ICC?
Well, I think already, as I said, the letter has come out. We are trying very hard to get the follow-up 2 letters. I think the follow-up 2 letters are far more important than the one that we have just released, because the second letter, as I said, which is directly, addressing the Secretary General, the Security Council, and the ICC, and the third letter, which is to all member states of the UN. I think, conceptually, theoretically, even practically, I think are crucial. So hopefully, if we can have those 2 letters come out, diaspora organization and diaspora members will have a lot of information to actually work with. And then, practically speaking, as I said, I mean, if we can organize meetings, it's difficult for us to do it from here. But if diaspora organizations organize those meetings, then we will take part. Obviously, we will cooperate in whatever way we can. And it's not just political parties. I'm saying civil society actors, victims, communities directly will take part. In whatever way that needs to be done, we will do.
Okay, great. I think we'll now take this to the floor. So if anyone can raise their hand, we'll get you unmuted so that you can ask Gajendrakumar a question directly. Saw a hand earlier, but I'm not too sure what happened there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you ask the question?
Can you hear me? Right. Okay. Okay. This is a question to Gajendrakumar. Do you think that this resolution is come as some tough? This is because of the previous resolution is co-sponsored by the Sri Lanka, which is cause this resolution come as yeah, tough.
You are breaking up. I couldn't hear you at all.
Can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
Right. Okay.
Can you try again, please?
This previous resolution is co-sponsored by the Sri Lankan government, but they didn't follow that resolutions. Because of because of that,
No, you're breaking up.
is
Because of that, and then I lost you.
Can you type the question, please, and I'll just field it because I think there's some connection issues.
hello.
Your connection is extremely weak.
Please type the question.
My question is: the previous the 31 resolution is co-sponsored by the Sri Lanka and not follow the resolution. But because of this reason, do you think is that this resolution is come as a very tough?
No. I mean, the point that I've been trying to make is that when it comes to resolutions, ultimately it is those interests that ultimately plays out. So there is absolutely no guarantee that just because Sri Lanka didn't commit itself to the 31 resolution that and they have withdrawn from it, that the resolution that comes out at the end of March would be something stronger. I'm not saying that at all. I think the danger is that between now and March, there will be a lot of bargaining that goes on, and if in case Sri Lanka to some extent is willing to fall in line with the interests of these actors, then we can have a very weak resolution as we've seen in the past. As in when you had a government that these countries that brought the resolution in 2012, when you had a government changing in 2015, and it's a government that these countries could work with, we had absolutely no progress. We just had three occasions of rollover resolution. So I'm quite aware of that. That is exactly why I've been so critical of this whole process. And the risk of the resolution being weak is even that much greater because we ourselves have political parties that still command a vast majority of the sort of seats or representation given by the Tamil people, who blindly are willing to toe the line of these interests. So my point is that we have to be extremely careful. You have to work very hard and you have to stay focused. I mean, to a great extent, if we can make sure that the Tamil political actors themselves and civil society stand firm, and create a situation where they if in case they compromise, that they are fully exposed to a point where they probably won't have any future. That is the sort of thing that to some extent will narrow the sort of space where these various actors can move with various options.
Okay, sorry, I just had some issues there. Okay, is anyone else willing to raise their hand? Anyone else have any questions they want to ask directly?
The Namaswayam is putting his hand.
Moment.
Sharon, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Gajan. I don't know whether you remember me. I'm Rajan Namasivayam.
Yes, of course.
Lovely to see you. My question is, I'm looking at, okay, you mentioned India's geopolitical interest in Sri Lanka, and I agree with you. But there's a little slant towards the Tamil Nadu politics because they are now going to face the state election very soon. There's a, and BJP as a party is desperate to get a foothold in some form or other in Tamil Nadu. Hence, that might influence things. Just to give you an example, the Per Arivalan and co. that is likely to be released in the coming days, which is again talks about having an impact on the Tamil Nadu politics. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't. I don't agree. I mean, my view is that Tamil Nadu, unfortunately, has always been an extension of Delhi. It has never been a sort of. It has never been a lever that Elam Tamils could have used with Delhi. It has never happened in the past. I think the only time that there was some element of that was in the mid '80s when people like Mr. MGR were were big players. But since then, I think very unfortunately, Tamil Nadu politics has just essentially been an extension of Delhi's. I think that continues today. I think today Tamil Nadu politics is even weaker, so much so that you will have the BJP that can wield much more power through proxies within Tamil Nadu than themselves contesting directly. So I think that is very unfortunate, but that is the reality. So I can't see that the particular dynamic that you are suggesting, I think is not going to happen anytime soon. The fact that there is this possible release of the people who are convicted for the Rajiv Gandhi murder. That is in my view, it is not something that is relevant with regards to the BJP. I think it is something that would have always been a tool, even if it was a Congress government. At various times there have been various messages. India is very good at sending these messages. I think it's one of the countries that looks at political nuancing with these sort of things. They put a lot of weight to that sort of thing. So the fact that you have this possible release, I think, is more symbolic, and it would have happened regardless of which party is in power. So I don't. Whilst it might be sold as a gimmick, if in fact the release happens, that it might be sold as a gimmick that the BJP used to try and win some votes in Tamil Nadu. I think, if at all, it will be a message sent to Sri Lanka, and that option has always been taken from time to time as a threat to send messages to Colombo. So I don't see that as going beyond symbolism. Ultimately, I think India still, despite all that is happening, I think India still believes that they want to give it a shot with regards to managing Colombo. For as long as India thinks that they can manage Colombo, the Tamils have to work very hard. Of course, like in the 70s when you had Mrs. Gandhi, where, of course, in that time the political culture internationally also was very different, but where you had a situation where Mrs. Gandhi was prepared to, take decisions and say that, no, this is a red line, you've crossed it, because, we don't want the US coming in the way that you're trying to bring them in and, take the sort of actions that they did. That sort of scenario still hasn't come, in my view, for India. India still believes that they can manage Sri Lanka by bring about regime change by giving certain other messages and seeing whether they will fall in line.
Thank you.
That's the danger. I mean, that is the worry. That is the worry, because they will, if it is this interim where, a country thinks that they can manage, that we as victims have to be even more careful, because you can just completely fall between the stools, as we have done in the last 10 years.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one last quick question, and then we'll wrap up. If anyone has a question that they're burning to ask. Yes, can we unmute us?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so there's been some ramblings about a consensual resolution coming from, I guess, people from the government of Sri Lanka, namely Jayendrakumar. So how realistic is that in materializing? Or is that like a non-issue?
No, I mean, I think that option is being considered. My information is also, and it's quite reliably, I'm quite reliably informed, is in fact that they are in fact quite seriously willing to consider consensual resolution. But whether both, even though they might want that, whether the gap can actually be filled, and if they in fact come up with some sort of resolution, whether each of the sides, the core group on the one hand and the Sri Lankan government on the other, can go back and be seen as credible, I think is very small. I mean, the gap is so large with regards to the stated position so far. Whether they're sincere to that or not is a different matter, but at least with regards to the stated position so far, it will be very difficult to see how they can come up with a resolution, unless, of course, Sri Lanka turns around and says that, they are willing to implement 30/1. And this is the danger. If in case Sri Lanka says that, and the Sri Lankan government is willing to face whatever backlash they get from the local constituency, I think the danger is that once again the Tamils have fallen between the stools. And this is why we have been so critical of this so-called fake incremental process, because ultimately we all know, at least, or rather we all should have known, that this resolution actually has nothing to do with the victims, and it just is a sort of a dance that is being played out to pursue these actors' own interests. That is the danger. I mean, we've been saying this for the last 10 years or more, that the Tamils should never have cooperated with these resolutions, because they fall far short of what can credibly deliver. And when you have a political party elected by the Tamils, where they had almost sole representative status, blindly supporting that resolution and justifying. If the Sri Lankan state by some chance can in fact turn around and tell all these countries that yes, we are willing to cooperate, then again we are in trouble as victims.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. I think we've taken far too much of Gajendrakumar's time, so thanks so much for Gajendrakumar for speaking to us and unpacking this report, as well as the joint letter, and really making sense of it for all of us. So yeah, thanks so much for speaking to us all today. Thanks to everyone at home for tuning in and for getting your questions in and participating in general. It's been a really good experience for all of us. And there will be a meeting tomorrow with Gajendrakumar again in Tamil. So yeah, stay tuned for that as well. So yeah, thanks so much everyone for coming, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Gajan and Chiran.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye then.